And so just to have that attitude that your wife is impacting your children and your family in huge ways, and you will value everything she does. And then when you come home from work and she said, man, I'm really tired, like these kids have just worn on my last nerve, and you're like, okay, I understand. I'm tired too, but I haven't had 8 hours with those two boys, right? I had different customers to deal with, but I'm fresh as far as dealing with our two boys, so I'll spend some time with the two boys. I'll take over for a little bit because I really value what you did today, and I want you to be happy. And you need a break, or you're at an 8-hour stopping point. I'll jump in right here and I'll help you out. My wife and I decided that I should be the stay-at-home parent. We could afford to do it, and she wanted me, and I wanted me at that time to be that stay-at-home dad. We had 5 kids. We were a mixed family, so we had 2 of our own, and we each brought, well, she brought 2 in, and I brought 1 in, so we had 5 altogether. And I loved my role. I loved being the stay-at-home dad. I loved being the homemaker. And it was a very busy role. And I also got to do a lot of home improvement stuff. So we wanted to remodel our house. It was a fixer-upper. I did a lot of work. I'm still doing a lot of updates and different things to it. And that was part of my role. And it felt good because I didn't have to go and work for another company doing home maintenance. I could just stay home and do home maintenance on our own property. And so to me, it was wonderful. Like it was a fantastic thing, and I believe it was through our marriage that we allowed that to happen. And I felt good about her. She really wanted to leave the house and work. She had a career. She really wanted to do this career, and she saw herself doing that career. And at that point in my life, I was okay with not doing the career. I had different careers and businesses and things up until that point. And I think it's good to do those things and try those things. And so you don't have to be a stay-at-home your entire adult life. Your kids are going to grow up anyway, so it's not like it's that much time. I think it's good to be a stay-at-home, and it's also good to not be a stay-at-home. And it doesn't have to be a male-female thing. Dads can be stay-at-homes too, but you have to keep busy. It's work, and you have to treat it like work. If you're a stay-at-home dad, that doesn't mean you act like the stereotypical father, or no, I'm sorry. You don't act like the stereotypical dad who worked all day, and then you get to sit on the couch when you come home. Actually, it doesn't work that way. It's a job, and it's a vocation, and it requires a lot of energy and time to be a homemaker and to be a child rearer. And then you add into that, if you got so many type of home skills or maintenance skills, you're doing that as well. So it's a lot of work. It's a whole lot of things to do. And I really loved it. My wife loved her role. And so there's nothing wrong with that. I love wearing my apron, and I love wearing my dish gloves, and I love doing the dishes and cleaning and helping out around the house and getting all the kids' food cooked. And I love making food and following recipes, and and I also love wearing my tool belt and getting my stuff going on and fixing the house. And women can do that too. I mean, there's nothing stopping a woman from fixing her own house, getting her tools out, doing the repairs, putting new windows in, taking care of it while she's, with the kids. There's no real set formula. I mean, you do things how you want to do it. But you have to work that out as a couple, and it has to be fair. If you're going to put in, if it's required to do 100 hours of work, then, you should make sure that work is equitable. Make it work. If half of your the work in the couple was going to be financial, and the other half is just going to be tangible, and it's going to require both. And if you're both providing the financial, well, then it's only fair that you both do the tangible. And maybe that means paying someone. If you're both working and you just don't have the time or energy, then you have the money now. So then you start paying other people as a job to do something tangible, but you have to work that out yourself. Find what works best for you as a couple, but it should be fair and loving. And husbands, you have to serve your wife, serve your family, look for the eternal rewards. It may not always feel fair. I know there's many times in my life where I was in the flesh. I was kind of bitter. I was feeling like I was underappreciated. I felt like put upon, and that's just a lot of that's just the flesh, and it's a lie a lot of the time. A lot of it's just plain selfishness. It can lead to covetousness, where you want something that you don't have, and you want something easier than you have. And it's a mindset that you can change through I believe the Holy Spirit, and through Scripture, and through prayer, and through living a devoted life. When you get into that, and I know I got to that place when my family got split up, and I had less. I really started to see things from a whole fresh perspective. I was like, you know what? I appreciate everything, and I'd love to be back. So like, It's a Wonderful Life. He got to see what it was like to lose everything, and then he was just so grateful to have it all back. And honestly, whatever you need to do, fathers, to get to that gratitude. Hopefully, it's not losing anything, but if you could just, Holy Spirit, through the Lord, through service, through prayer, get rid of the entitlement, get rid of the self-gratification desires, get rid of the covetousness, and the Holy Spirit's going to have to help you with that. It's not something you can humanly do very well. You're going to need the Holy Spirit. You're going to have to be committed and start fasting, start getting up at 5 a.m., start reading the Bible early, praying early, start going without food. Put yourself into a place where you're subduing your flesh, and then you'll start hopefully appreciating the things that you do have. Because I know when you fast food, you start to really appreciate just the flavors and tastes of food the next day. Challenge yourself, push yourself into a place where you're going to appreciate and savor the blessings that you really do have. Most of you here, if I'm talking to people where I live, or at least in my country, a lot of us here are blessed. The fact we have things that we really, you'll know when you know what I'm talking about if you lose a lot of it. Simple things like being put out of your house and not having a house, and then being able to come back is like amazing. To have your house and just be able to take a shower in your own house, and be able to make meals and just cook and have a garden and have just be with your kids. It's all just be grateful. Gratitude attitude, cultivate it. Wonderful to appreciate everything in your life. Don't go about your day grumpy and put out. Just being in the same room with your family is honestly a gift from God that I totally appreciate. I don't care if they're making messes and breaking things, because I'd rather have them here with me enjoying a life together than to go without. And the cost of that is totally, totally worth it. Think of that same thing with your spouse. To have the same attitude with your spouse, just appreciate it. Everything's a gift from God. Try to have that mindset. Everything is a gift from God. Appreciate the fact that you actually get food, you have shelter, you have a car, if you have a bike, you have kids that are not sick today. There's always something to be grateful for and appreciate. Put your mind on those things. Father, who was also a stay-at-home dad, I did a lot of home repairs while I was at home, because our family didn't have to spend that money then on having a handyman come and do those work. So while I was at home, not earning the money to pay a handyman, but I was just completing the handyman projects myself. So in today's episode of Fervent Fathers, I thought maybe I could contribute as a father who was formerly a homemaker, child rearer, full-time, and cooking, cleaning, laundry, shopping for the house. And I wanted to add that perspective as a father to a debate that was on YouTube it was on the Ellen Fisher podcast, and it was a feminism debate. And I wanted to kind of chime in here and there from a father's point of view or a male point of view. It was a debate called Why Women Are Feeling More Burnout Than Ever. And it was with Isabel Brown and Bronte Bremzik. So here we go.
See, and I think that we're reading different statistics because, again, I've read many statistics that show that typically mothers and people who give birth are more likely to suffer from mental health conditions than women who do not, because it is more of a stressor. There's all of that unpaid work, unpaid labor, and unseen mental load that women have to carry. And we also have to look at the way that these surveys are asked, because a lot of times the questions that are asked in a certain way that want to get a certain answer from you.
So yeah, statistics can definitely be used to support opposing viewpoints, surveys, polls, all these things. There's a famous phrase that says there's three kinds of lies: lies, damned lies, and statistics. We can use these statistics pretty much any way we want. We can even conduct polls and surveys in such a way that they're manipulated. I read a good book on this. It's called Lies, Damn Lies, and Statistics. It came out in 1976. It was by Michael Wheeler. My grandfather recommended it to me when I was growing up, who were behind these big nationwide polls. And they even admitted that these things can be manipulated and skewed, and how you ask the questions and how you put the data together and who you ask and so many other things. And so it's very difficult to get meaningful information from statistics. And now you have two people in a debate, both using statistics against one another. So I tend to kind of put those aside, because I don't know how much meaning they have, how much value they really have to claim that you have data or statistic on something when they can be so easily manipulated and not trusted. She even admitted that herself, but then she continues to use statistics to back up her viewpoints throughout the debate.
Recognizing that all of these different ways of life are valid. And again, through history, like historically, women have been given these very narrow options and told, and when we talk about propaganda, right? I see that as propaganda. I see it as propaganda to say that you will not be happy unless you have a family and children, because for a lot of people, that is not true. And that's also not necessarily a choice. If you don't meet the right person or you get stuck with the wrong person,
Absolutely.
She's trying to claim that women today are told what they have to do. And I'm not so sure you and I are experiencing that today, as far as it seems like to me. My wife was a family medicine doctor. She went through medical school, residency, became a physician. She opened up her own medical practice. I never saw any obstacles. I think there was as many females, probably more females in the residency program where she attended. From what I'm hearing, the numbers are actually the same. Women are in medical school to the same number that men are today. In fact, I think the number might even be more women now at this point. And we see all around us. There's women CEOs all over the place. There's Trump's cabinet. He picked quite a bit of women in a lot of positions. We're seeing women legislators, women in local city councils. And
it wasn't the marriage itself, it was the person. So ensure that you are, aiming for an equal partnership, and, make sure that you are choosing your partner wisely, because women have not been given that opportunity. Women have not been, encouraged to really make those intentional choices.
Christians who are talking about Christian dating are basically emphasizing is making sure that you're prepared for marriage and that you're able to pick the right spouse in marriage. She's hearing of women who aren't happy with their spouses, and they're not happy being homemakers in that house, and they have the wrong husband. Serve her well to understand that Christian dating is all geared about that. It's about preparing yourself for marriage and then having the right spouse. And that's another reason why there's celibacy. It's the reason why there's abstinence until marriage, because all those things help in the selection process, because you're not confused by the hormones of sexual relationship while you're trying to find your spouse. And so you're thinking with a sober, clear mind, and you're thinking about all the other factors. Am I getting along? Do I have things in common with them? Am I enjoying them without having sexual activity? And you're not influenced by that. And then you're able to make sober, clear choices that are based on things that are going to last for the long term in that relationship.
Deviating from this idea that motherhood and wifehood are the key identifiers of a woman, I feel like that is what devoids women of purpose. And this idea that you can achieve whatever you want and you can be whatever you want, is the intention of that is to help women find their purpose, because so many people had to put their dreams and desires aside to lift up the men in their life. And now we're saying, no, we want the opportunity and we want to find our own purpose. And that doesn't always have to be motherhood and wifehood. Women
can find purpose in things besides being a mother and a wife. I think everyone's in agreement with that. Women are all over the society now doing all sorts of things. In fact, it seems like most families are now two working parents, and it feels like that's needs to change when it seems like it's already been changed and it's already in effect. She's speaking from inexperience of what it's like to raise kids and how a big role that is. But I can speak from a father's point of view that it's, for me, it was the most important of all my jobs. More important than making movies, more important than owning restaurants, more important than teaching at schools, hobbies, interests. Raising your kids as a vocation to me was the most meaningful and special of all the jobs that I could hold. That doesn't mean that might not be true for her or other people. And I don't think anyone's imposing that on anybody else. I think we're free to make those choices. And I was at a place in my life where I was interested in transitioning out of certain jobs and being a homemaker. So that was the arrangement that we decided to do. We actually talked about that before we got married, and we made that arrangement and agreement because it suited our family. So I was the homemaker, and I took care of things at home and raised the kids and cooked the meals and cleaned the house and so forth, while she was going to work, following her career as a doctor and providing the bulk of the income. And that's what she wanted. She said she didn't feel comfortable being a stay-at-home mom. And at that time in my life, I wanted to be a stay-at-home dad. That also involved, not only just involved raising the kids and cooking meals and taking care of those things and driving everybody around, but it fit my personality because I like to be outdoors. So I would take all the kids on outings constantly, whether they'd be in the stroller, on a carrier, on the back of my bike. So we would be doing outdoor activities, stuff that I'd like to do anyway, but I would just have my kids with me. And my kids got exposed to a lot of things that way. And I also found it a very rewarding vocation in that time of my life. And I was able to multitask as well. I also remodeled our house and did many other things because I had a schedule where I was free to stay home and do those type of things to our house, while she decided she wanted to be the working professional.
Requested a higher or an increase in their wages were seen as less likable and more aggressive than men at the same companies asking for the same thing, and they were therefore less likely to be granted that pay increase and less likely to be given promotions. And so you can see in that culture how women would then be discouraged from asking, because then you're seen as less likable, and it's going to create more hostility in the workplace, which is unpleasant. And so that's reducing women's opportunities for growth.
What are your thoughts on that?
I just think it's not quite indicative of what we're seeing with patterns in society today. Women are statistically much more likely to seek out a college degree today. They are overwhelmingly the majority of college students and graduates. Women are twice as likely, according to some studies, to be hired for the same job as men, and twice as likely to be promoted for the same job as men within the same company, depending on which studies you're looking at. So the problem with statistics and evidence is that it doesn't really tell the whole picture, right?
Female dominated, we're underpaid and continue to be underpaid because they're female dominated. There's a principle called male flight, that when more women enter into a career field, men leave, and then the wages for that position tend to either stagnate, they don't continue to increase as inflation in the years increase, or they decrease because women are now in those positions. And so we have to account for, like you said, maternity leave. We have to account for all these things. So when we're looking at the gender pay gap, there are statistics that show equal degrees, equal positions, they're paid differently, but also from a more broader societal perspective, women have found themselves in positions that are compensated less because they're seen as lesser than.
Whether or not those things are true, they could be temporarily true because women have only recently been available to take these positions within the last, say, 50 years or 80 years. So we might not see the full progression of that just yet, but I believe that would work itself out over time because of market factors, the capitalist system, how those things play out. Those things are always opposed to paying workers. Those things are always opposed to trying to have people get more pay. And so I think if men are at a point where they're getting a certain amount of pay and women aren't, things will balance itself out, especially as women are starting to be more in demand. Also, another factor to consider is that most employees want the best employee for the job. They're not going to just employ a man because he's a man, they're going to want somebody, at the end of the day, they want someone to get it done. And they want that person they can depend on. If that person's a woman, and a lot of the time it is, then that woman will get the position. And if that woman's saying, hey, I'm going to leave if I'm not getting paid properly, then he would have to pay her that pay increase or lose her to a guy who's not maybe as reliable. So I think it's just factors that will work itself out that may be possibly true, maybe not. But if they are true, I think it'll work itself into the system. They want to keep good employees and they're willing to pay more for that. They're not going to just hire a guy, especially if supposedly they have to pay him more, who's not as good as the woman.
You mentioned earlier something that stuck with me, that embracing marriage or motherhood in the past for our mothers and grandmothers was elevating the men in their life rather than putting themselves first. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So typically women were encouraged to stay home, take care of the house, take care of the kids, while their husband, the father of their children, went after their dreams. They went after the promotions. They dedicated their life to work and whatever their passion was and whatever their purpose was. And so women's jobs weren't necessarily to discover what their purpose and their passions are. If it happened to be outside of motherhood and wifehood, it was instead to be like, we'll just encourage him to do what he needs to do, and you pick up all the pieces while he's out.
Okay, so what Bronte seems to be saying is that men always had the choice of what they wanted to do with their lives, and the women were just basically not given a choice other than to stay home with the kids. And I think that's no longer really applicable. I mean, at this point in time, I think women are doing pretty much whatever they want. And I think it really depends on the couple and what they decide to do as a couple. But society is supporting women in pretty much every career. There's even women mechanics at my Monroe. Women are doing pretty much everything out there at this point. Then now does that become a problem for the men who are now the ones staying home and taking care of the home and the kids, while the wife is fulfilling her career? Is that somehow to be looked upon as negative for the men at that point? And then are they going to have a revolution to, I think the whole conflict is stupid because both roles are equally valid and both roles are equally good. I think it comes down to the family and how they determine they want to do it. And it could be just for like one decade, the female is following her career. Maybe the roles get reversed after another decade. Maybe there's a different seasons of their lives, but I think we're at the point where we can discuss these things and do those things as a married couple.
More of that mental load of the household. So even when in our modern society where really economically a lot of us can't be single income, we have to be dual income, a lot of that load still lands on the woman, and there's a domestic labor gap.
So she's saying there's a domestic labor gap where when women are still working and the husbands are also working, that when it comes to taking care of the household, the women are still giving most of those duties. That's something that actually is not legislated. It's something that couples work out themselves. They make these arrangements themselves. They find the combination that works the best. And again, it just comes down to, are you finding a spouse that is willing to sacrifice? I mean, if you're a husband and you're willing to sacrifice and lay down for your wife, you're not going to want to see her leaving the house and working and then coming home and working again while you're relaxing. That's not loving, right? So if you're a loving spouse, you're going to want to help to the same extent that she's helping at home, because you're both leaving the house to make income. Now, of course, if her job is to stay home and take care of the kids, then you would expect her to do a lot more of that because that's her primary job. In reverse, it was my primary job to take care of those things. So it wasn't really right for her to have to take care of a lot when she came home because it was my job. However, at the same time, she worked, say, 10 hours that day. I worked 10 hours while she was gone, but there's still 4 or 5 more hours in the day to raise the kids. Am I going to work a 14-hour shift as a homemaker and she's done? So that's something that couples can determine themselves, how they're going to work that out. Maybe you both take care of the kids, or maybe you take turns. One day you're on, one day you're off.
Which obviously manifests in the trends that we're seeing societally. We have the lowest marriage rate right now since we began recording marriage rates in 1867. And we hit an all-time low in the last 100 years fertility rate in 2020, to the point that we can't even replace our own existing population. So clearly, this narrative that's being told to young women is overwhelmingly convincing that you are going to be miserable when you tie the knot and spend the rest of your life life with one individual. That's echoed through every single headline and viral social media video that we see at the exact same time.
And that's a shame, because marriage is actually a big help to child rearing. It's a lot harder to be a single parent and raise your kids. I'm doing it now. I have to have this house taken care of and cleaned and maintained and ready and taken care of for my kids. And then when they're here, I have to do that alone. And I have to work to pay for all this alone, while she's doing the exact same things at another house, paying for that house, taking care of that place, and then raising the kids alone. Marriage is actually much more ideal for child raising. You're working in the same house. Your expenses are not doubled. You're combining things. So when she's over at her other house cooking dinner and I'm over here cooking dinner, how stupid is that, when a married couple could be at home and one person cooks for everybody? And it doesn't have to be the same person. How unfair is that, right? There should be some way to work that out. If the husband say he's not really into cooking, he's not good at cooking, but he makes a little bit more income, well, that little bit of extra income is all going to go towards paying for her to get better support in the mealtime, whether that be eating out, ordering food, getting meals that are pre-prepared. We all should be contributing equal amounts to the family, and marriage is definitely the strongest way to be together. It's the most cost efficient. It's the most, having a partner and doing life together is going to be so much easier. So if these statistics are saying that people don't want to get married, that's just foolish.
And even more so, the life is going to be sucked out of you if you bring more life into the world. But that's been proven to be the opposite over and over and over again through every generation. The overwhelmingly happiest people in society who self-report the most purpose, the most meaning, the most fulfillment in their life are mothers and wives. So how do you reconcile the difference between that?
Yeah, again, depends on the studies that you look at. And I recognize you continue to use this word never. Women are told that they should never get married and never have children. And I push back on that because I disagree. Again, I think the idea is encouraging choice, encouraging intentional choice. Is this really the person you want to be with? Is this someone you can see as a partner? Is being a mother something that you couldn't imagine your life without? Women are not being told to never do those things. We're being told.
Well, they are quite frequently, actually. Not by you, perhaps, but by many, many people in society, many of the most influential people in society.
Well, it depends on who you listen to and how you intake that information, because I don't hear them saying never. I hear them saying make those intentional choices. You should never end up with somebody who's going to take you for granted. You should never end up with somebody who expects you to pick up the pieces of their life while you let yours fall.
No, I mean, if you want to live life to the full, get married. You're going to have the highest highs. You're also going to have some of the lowest lows. You're going to have it all in between, but it's really the best way to live your life. The lowest of the lows are because of issues usually within yourself that your spouse is going to point out to you or draw out of you. So those issues are still there inside of you. That you brought them into your marriage. They're still there if you're single. They're still going to be there, and they're going to manifest in a lot of other ways. So having that spouse is just going to help you identify those weak areas so that you can target them and then heal them, grow them, mature. And from a Christian perspective, there's there's an aspect of like repenting and trusting in Jesus and having a life led by the Holy Spirit in order to be saved. So like there's actually a real aspect of eternity tied into your reform and your repentance, and your spouse can help you get to that point where you're saved, live forever in eternity, and enjoy the ideal life that you can't enjoy here on earth. No matter what you do, you're never going to have the ideal life for long. It's always going to be extremely temporary, and then it's gone. But God's promising us an eternal life of everything that you're not getting here in heaven, and you're going to have it every day. The most fulfilling part of your life is probably going to be your family and your children. I've been both. I was single until I was like 30, and then I started having kids and a family, and it's much more rewarding to be a family member and have kids than it is to be single without kids. And the thing is, you can still enjoy some of these things that people enjoy when they're single, but you can have it with your kids, and it makes it that much more special. I mean, I always much would rather do these single activities with my kids than doing them without my kids. Whether it be camping, hiking, biking, playing sports, exploring new museums. It's so much better to have your kids with you. But when I have my kids around, it just adds a whole nother purpose. It just takes it to a higher level. You know, because I'm with them, I'm sharing life with them, I'm teaching them as we're playing together, we're bonding together, and they're also learning new skills, and they're emulating things that I'm doing, and they're watching, and I can do all those things while I'm doing the activity that I did when I was single. That was just the activity. That's all it was, right? Pro-choice should be the choice about what spouse you have, and are you going to have choosing to get pregnant with that person? And absolutely should be very careful about those choices. And am I choosing to have sexual intercourse? Yeah, like I'm pro-choice. Yeah, I mean, you can end up with somebody that takes you for granted. That's the sin in all of us. And that's not just men that have that sin. Women have that same sin too. I've experienced that. I was taken for granted, if you want to call it that. I'm not saying it was all taken for granted. I mean, I did a lot to serve my wife and family, and I believe that was all justified. However, the fact that she abandoned me and left, I don't believe that was justified, because now nothing you can pre-plan. Even when you have a spouse who you believe is making a vow to you, that's what the beauty of marriage is. You're making a vow that you won't abandon or leave that person, and it gives you a safe environment to then give your all to that other person, because you know that person will be there for you throughout the decades. And so everything that you're investing is going to remain in you and with you and your family. And if you didn't have that relationship, then you would be investing in something that would be that would be taken away from you, and you wouldn't want to give your all in that case. So I think marriages start out with the premise that you're not going to be taken for granted for. And in fact, it shouldn't be easy to take somebody for granted, and marriage and divorces should not be as simple as filing a paper saying we have irreconcilable differences and goodbye. It really should not be that simple. And in fact, wives do that to their husbands. I know what that's like. I didn't have any say in it, and she just basically, you can get divorced for any reason, and I think that that's wrong, and it undermines God's intentions for marriage. And I believe God will hold us accountable for that as a society, for allowing those things to happen. And it's wicked. Honestly, it's wicked, and it's undervaluing, destroying the safety of the children to be in an environment like that, where there's less stability and less dedication to one another as family members. And so she's saying that she thinks that that's a one-way street, where men are just doing it to women, but it's not that way. Women are also doing it to men, and you never know if you're going to be taken for granted. But you have less assurance of that by far if you're not going to get married, because now there's no commitment and connections legally, financially, to even stay together. And so the abandonment can happen much easier, especially if you have children or if you get pregnant.
Those are the narratives. You should never end up with the wrong person. Choose the wrong person if you have the ability to do otherwise. And when you mention, people not having kids and not getting married, it's because they're not finding the right people. And we're making sure that people are making more intentional choices. And I think that's a kind of humorous connection to me, is while women are being told that we should be choosing better partners and making more intentional choices, that leads to us being like, maybe a lot of the men are just not worth committing to.
Yeah, I would agree that women should be very careful and intentional in how they find their husbands. And I think they have every right, and they should be very careful and selective in that process. Absolutely. In fact, they shouldn't be enablers of immature guys who aren't stepping up to do their job. And then at the same time, because we grow up in a lot of divorce, there's not a lot of young men being raised to be husbands by their fathers because of the lack of custody the fathers have with their kids, and they're not able to impact their kids in that way. Plus, not to mention that if they are divorced, they're probably not the best father figure to teach them about marriage in many cases, not always, but I think especially if they've repented and they learned and grew from it, or if it wasn't necessarily all their fault or whatever, if they didn't leave the marriage or they didn't, make the decision to end it, Women should be very careful in who they select, and that's why the Christian model is still probably the best model out there. Because the thing about it this way, if you're a woman trying to find the ideal husband, and one of the benefits of being a husband is that you get to have sexual relationships with your wife, and she gets to you get to live with her and do these things. And if the women are allowing that all to happen before they're married, then what's the incentive then to be committed and married? You're already getting all the benefits. And so you're foolish by living outside the Christian morality that says you should be abstinent and celibate until marriage. You're actually hurting yourself. You're undermining your own chances of finding and keeping a good husband.
When you talk about things like your everyday life, the tasks that are necessary in your everyday life, those are the things that are really going to impact your overall happiness, is how your everyday life is functioning. And so when we study and when we survey people, mothers say 77% of mothers say that they are the ones who are primarily responsible for their child's schedules and their child's needs, where only 7% of men say the same. And then when you survey couples as a total, only 30% of couples say they have an equal division of household labor. So 70% of American couples do not have an equal division of labor within their household. And I really feel like that reflects how people's happiness can be affected, whether or not you're in a marriage or you have kids, and how the totality of your household is going to function.
I think if you look around the evidence around you, you're seeing a lot of fathers today taking care of kids. I'm seeing it a lot wherever I go. I'm seeing it in my neighborhoods, in the schools. And I think that's still a big factor. I think husbands are doing a lot more. And again, that's something that you have to negotiate and work out with your spouse, make this thing work. Because at the end of the day, the husbands wants their wives to be happy. A happy wife is a happy life, right? So if you're a husband and your wife is miserable because she's working a full-time job and coming home and doing like 90% of all the decision-making for the kids and all the child rearing, difficult for your wife and difficult then for your life.
But I think this speaks to a larger trend, I think, in how purpose and fulfillment are being packaged to people, not just women, in 2024 postmodern America. You know, we talk about the burden of raising someone, the burden of managing someone's schedule or lifestyle if they are your child, that all of the 76% of women have to do this and very few men have to do this. The problem I'm noticing with postmodern feminism packaged to pretty much everything in our lives, pregnancy, giving birth, raising children, being married in a beautiful relationship for the rest of your life, is that we are packaging everything in a way that is oriented towards me, 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 me. I deserve less stress. I deserve general less mental load in my life. I deserve XYZ. And ultimately, I think we are building brick by brick a very selfish society in the process. It's why we're constantly self-conscious, self-obsessed, self-absorbed, and frankly, really struggling with the internal questions of anxiety and depression, of substance abuse, of suicidation, which is far too normal today among young women. When in reality, we should be asking the question, what can I do for my society? That it is a blessing to give your time to someone else. It's a blessing to serve your family, to raise the next generation of children. That's not to say there aren't hardships associated with that, but we've convinced several generations of people in this country that the only thing that should come first is your immediate want today, which ultimately, over decades and a lifetime, has proven to be incredibly devoid of purpose and meaning over time.
I like what Isabel's saying here about the me, me, me. Yeah, a lot of these gripes, if you want to call them that, that Bronte's saying, are related to me, 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 and selfishness to some extent, right? You know, I should be happy. I should be getting everything I want. I should be the one that's the most satisfied in the relationship. But all that's doing is flipping it from one side to the other. So if you're saying, yeah, men always had the upper hand where they got to do what they wanted and it was all about them and what made them the most satisfied. And now you're trying to flip it to where now that goes all to the women. Now we still have the same inequality and the same problems in the families and relationships. So we should be looking more towards like, how can husbands and wives work together in a way that's beneficial to everybody? And that's what we did in our family. I was fine with like raising 5 kids simultaneously, taking care of all those needs so that my wife could pursue and focus on becoming a family medicine doctor, and then also starting her own private practice on her own, which was a big deal with 3 different locations. So she needed a lot of help inside the home to do all those things. And I was glad to do that. It was a family event. I even brought the kids along. I remember going in to remodel one of our offices, and I was up working up on a ledge, and I looked over on my ladder, and there's our little baby in his diaper standing there smiling at me, because I had to take them with me, and I was not had to. It was like, it was a gift. It was a privilege to be able to have my kids with me while I was working. And that was only possible because we were working together as a family. So I could go to work that day. My job was to say, fix up an office. Well, not too many times can you do construction work or do a work like that where you have to work with and be with your own kids. And I got to do that. And so my kids were playing on the floor, playing with toys, and I was over here working or installing this, and my kids were watching me. Sometimes I'd pick up a tool and help. And it was like, it's amazing. That's how it should be. And here we are. It seems like we're having people like knock that and say like it's not good. And it's also assuming that women can't fix houses and remodel homes. Like I think Bronte's assuming that women, if they're staying home, all they're going to do is cook and clean. And actually, when I stayed home, I was remodeling, redoing the floors and putting the windows in and fixing plumbing and drywalling and painting and repairing things. And why can't a woman do that too when she's at home? Someone's got to do it, because if you're not doing it yourself, you're going to be paying, and someone's going to have to work outside the house to pay for that, somebody to come into your house to do those things. So wouldn't it make more sense to then the woman just fix all those things? It adds so much more value and meaning to your home when you fix it yourself, and it saves everybody money, and you get to be with your kids when you're working. I'm having trouble understanding what her complaints are. Actually, I'm sorry. It doesn't make sense to me. Women are allowed to make pretty much any career choice they want today. They're highly favored in the workforce. My wife gets really good pay. The pay that they state on the job is the same pay that she got. So it's not like she applied for the job at this pay rate and they only paid it to a man. Like, she got that pay too. I don't get all that. And also, if you're married to a man who's making more money, guess what? You're a married couple. You get the benefit from that income because your income is put together. So whatever he makes, you get, and vice versa. So if a man is getting paid more, well, guess what? You're getting paid more too as his wife. So I don't understand that conflict either. I think we just need to be grateful and have gratitude that we're able to have what we have, and we should appreciate all what we have. And if we're marrying someone who actually knows how to sacrificially love one another, you're going to have a union that's going to support one another in such a way that's going to make both people and the kids thrive. You're going to be a thriving family. And honestly, if you look at a lot of Christian families who are intentional about their faith, you're going to see a lot of that. You're going to see the thriving kids and the healthy families and the happy wives and the content husbands, because they're living biblical principles that God's already instituted for successful families. And the problem was we just stopped following those things, those recipes. It doesn't say that the man has to be the one that works out the house. It doesn't say that the woman can't work outside the house, but it does make more sense if one person is able to make more money to then have the other person emphasize that for the sake of the family. I did that. That doesn't necessarily mean I have to throw my own career away. And a lot of careers aren't that fulfilling anyway. If you ask a lot of guys, I think it's a lot of out of necessity. They're like, I really don't want to be doing this job. I don't really want this career, but I have to do it because that's all I can do, and I have to provide for my family, and that's important to me. So this whole idea of like, oh, it's just like the dream come true to be working outside the house isn't necessarily true for a lot of guys. I don't think they all believe that or feel that. Yeah, she's saying it's a blessing to serve your family, and that's the right attitude. And I think it starts with that attitude. It's a blessing to serve your family. And so if that's because in serving your family, then you're serving God, and serving God's your highest priority, everything else is going to align itself properly. It's an eternity mind. It's also focused on what's good for the others. And if you live that way, your attitude is going to be different. You're not going to be so concerned about your own rights and whether you have everything and exactly equal to the other person. Are you quite as happy or satisfied with the other person? That's just a futile mindset. And the best attitude is be like, I want to serve God. God gave me the gift of life. He gave me everything that I have. I don't even have a right to a spouse. I don't have a right to even be able to work. Wasn't promised 2 eyes that worked and 2 hands that could work. I wasn't promised the ability to think and be able to get a job. and get hired anywhere. I wasn't promised the ability to have a spouse that wanted to be married to me. I wasn't promised that we'd be fertile and have our children or be able to adopt. And so to have any of these things is really all dependent on whether God gave them to you as a gift. And so if you operate under that attitude that everything I have is a gift, I'm going to be glad in it. And I'm going to hopefully be very careful about my selection and my spouse, that we're equally yoked, we're on the same page, that we both have the same morals and value and putting God first and then the biblical principles. And if you are, most likely you're going to be able to work things out with your husband and your wife. You're going to be able to work things out where you can come up to some workable arrangement where everyone is maximizing their gifts and serving to the fullest. And if you're having a family where everyone's serving each other to the fullest, that everyone is benefiting and everyone's thriving. So if your wife is giving her all to her husband, her husband's giving his all to his wife, and everyone's pulling all their weight, it's going to be a beautiful thing. And that's really what we're striving for. If you're married to someone who all they're doing is waiting on you to take care of things and waiting for you to do all the work, then you've probably selected the wrong spouse, and probably you selected the wrong spouse because you were fornicating before you got married, and you made a really hasty choice or emotional choice. You didn't select the right person. You're choosing an immature person who was getting all the benefits of marriage without the commitment, and that's what you ended up with. And now you're saying you're unhappy and it's unfair, and you're advocating for so-called women's rights when it's really about living biblical values and making better choices. And then loving one another and serving one another. She said a life that's, end up devoid of purpose and meaning. And I think that, there's a lot of people who were men who worked in the workforce in those generations. At the end of their lives, they'd be like, I'm sorry, I regret that I worked too much. I regret that I sought that job that was a higher pay, but then I was around my family less. I'm sorry that I took jobs where I had to work so much and miss my kids growing up, things like that. They're not like cheerleading and going, they're not that grateful for it. And so you have, say, Bronte, who's advocating for these things that men have already learned the hard way that they're not fulfilling. Being an insurance adjuster for your life may not be, at the end of your life, thing that you value the most. It was the most fulfilling. It may have been an important thing, though, and a means to providing a service to the business world, and maybe a financial way you provided for your family, but it may not be all that fulfilling. So we got to be careful about that too, is, what exactly is meaningful in life and what is fulfilling? Well, if you read Ecclesiastes and Solomon, the wisest man in the earth, who had the wealth of anyone, he said that pretty much nothing. It was all meaningless toil. And the only thing that was satisfying was the very simple things in life, was knowing God above all else, living and serving God, and just the simple things in life, like enjoying a meal with your family. And that's really what he just came to the end of his life, realizing. I think we're over, in our immaturity and our inexperience and lack of knowledge, we're overemphasizing these things, which have been wiser people who have had more experience have actually lived and said, you know what, you're chasing the wrong dream. Like, these are the things that are important.
And I shockingly would disagree with that. I feel like there's not necessarily anything wrong with being selfish when it comes to your own life. Like, listen, this is what I want to do. This is what makes me happy. And I think that for the longest time, women were told that their needs should be put to the side to prioritize others, whether it be their families, their children, their husbands, whatever. And so now, you know what? If women don't want to dedicate their entire being to other people, I have no problem with that.
I think she seems to be reacting to families that didn't have a godly husband in it. That's what it sounds like. Because when you have a godly husband who's actually living their life like Christ and sacrificing themselves for their family, then the wife would have to be almost satisfied. And that's, who wouldn't be, right? And I think she's just reacting to generations of women maybe in her own family that did not have Christ-like godly husbands, and she's just reacting to that.
And I feel like we know what it is to pour our time and energy into people, but it's about whether that is recognized and appreciated. That's where it becomes whether or not it brings you happiness or brings you stress. And you talk about women being more depressed and more anxious, and I think there's a lot of societal factors, especially when it comes to the war on women's rights. I think that that is something essential to recognize, that women aren't just depressed and anxious because we're choosing to be single and child free. Like, a lot of us are depressed and anxious because our rights and our mere existence is being questioned of whether or not we should be able to have autonomy over our bodies, both medically but also professionally, and whether or not we're able to make choices, because it feels very paternalistic to tell women that, like, oh, well, these are the things that will make you happy, when that's not going to be true for every woman. You have to make them, allow them to choose.
Well, if you live your life pleasing God and your aim is to please God, and you believe that God's recognizing everything that you do and he's noticing everything you do, then you're not going to be disgruntled, and it's not going to matter so much about whether you're getting a pat on the back and accolades and appreciated if God's seeing everything you do. I'm not saying that people shouldn't appreciate you and they shouldn't value your life. I struggle with that myself because I knew God and I had a relationship with God and I knew that I was serving him, but I still had the fleshly nature who was upset because I wasn't being taken care of as much in the family as everyone else was. And that can happen to a guy. It doesn't have to be a female thing. It happened to me. So, like, you know, I felt like the one that was taken advantage of and wasn't getting the best treatment in the family and was giving the most. But part of that was probably just my own selfishness and flesh. Some of it might not even been true, because if we're selfish, we're only going to see things from our skewed viewpoint. Maybe that I was not serving the most and getting the most. It may have just been my own selfishness that felt that way. And so we got to be careful about our heart. Our heart is wicked and deceitful. And if we're not living and believing in God, that we're serving a God who's just and rewards those, then I think, yeah, you're going to have a different mindset. And that's why Christian men and Christian women should be married together, because you're going to share that mindset. And it's going to be very difficult if you're a Christian and you're marrying a non-Christian.
Okay, I definitely want to get into women's rights and abortion, but really quick, I'm going to chime in a little bit just as a mother myself. I do think that you're right in the sense that today's society expecting women to both be the caretaker and work is extremely stressful on women. And I think sometimes, potentially, let me know your thoughts on this, that when women are told that motherhood is not purposeful and that it's not the most enriching thing that you're going to have in your life and that you should pursue a career, that maybe that could be the stress imbalance of like expecting women to both be mothers and have a career, and that maybe it's okay for this season in life for women to have this role of, I'm going to rear the children, which it's such a mindset thing, right? Like we're going back to the mindset of like, is men up like pursuing their dreams and careers more meaningful, or is raising children more meaningful? Like, as myself, as the woman that I am, I would definitely say raising my children would be more meaningful. So I wonder your thoughts on that potentially this stress could be because of this expectation that women are supposed to produce at the same levels of men. I recently had on Suzanne Benker on my podcast and just broke down in tears with her validating that it's okay to just want to be a mom.
Yeah.
You know? And so, yeah, that thought. And then we'll move on to these other topics.
Yeah.
I like what she said, that, yeah, raising children is definitely much more meaningful, because I think that is true for me. And I think it is probably true for most people, most parents. I think that working a job is definitely below that. But I think at the same time, if you haven't worked another job and you've only known being a homemaker, then I think there might be a desire to see more and do more in the world. But who's to say that you can't? And who's to say you can't do that with your children too? There's all kinds of opportunities to take your kids on service and mission careers. You could be involved with whatever thing that you find meaningful in your sphere and bring your kids into that too as well. In fact, it's a lot more meaningful for me in any job I've ever had if I could have my kids with me doing it. So like, if you can find a job where you can serve, even if it's not making a lot of money, but if it's still serving and you're getting a lot of joy out of that and satisfaction, and have your kids around for that is really special. But yeah, I mean, there's a desire to do more and see more of the world. Sure, you might feel trapped. We'll get out and do those things. A lot of it's just personal choices because the person doesn't have any interest and never did any hobbies, and they're just boring. So, but if you get out there and start doing more things, you might realize, you know what? I enjoy doing these hobbies and I love having my kids around. I really don't want to work because I enjoy this. This is much more meaningful to me than than this job. This job where I have to be there 8 to 4 Monday through Friday, and there's all these different issues and the people, and it's starting to get like a routine, and I think we're over glamorizing that. I worked a lot of jobs, and man, when you can impact kids and how they're looking at life, and you can raise them in your faith and your beliefs, and you can have a relationship with your own children and enjoy them all the stages of growing up, as opposed to going to a job where you're like digging holes and putting fence posts in and fixing houses in some neighborhood that may not even seem like they have that much value. It's so much nicer to be a parent and raise children. So I think raising children is more satisfying than a lot of jobs I've ever had. Building a deck for somebody was never more meaningful than spending a day with my kids. So sad to think that the mindset that whatever you did at work, maybe you made a contract, maybe you built a deck, maybe you fixed somebody's tooth, that's somehow more important than a day spent with your kids. And to me, it's hands down, the kids are much more important, spending the day with your kids. And so fighting to not be around your kids, to build decks and fix teeth and do contracts and drive buses, and that just seems silly.
Absolutely is okay to just be a mom, because mothers are the absolute backbone of our society. They do the most unpaid and unseen labor. And I think when it comes to choosing motherhood, a lot of women have been told that it is all sunshine and rainbows. And I think there has to be that recognition that motherhood is extremely rewarding, but also extremely hard, which is why we need to be choosing our partners appropriately. We need to have societal systems in place that allow women to, take that chapter of life and dedicate it to their children. Is there, paid maternity leave? Is there affordable childcare for when you just need that day off? Is there the opportunities and the support structure available for women who want to be mothers and dedicate themselves to that and still maintain their sanity and themselves at the same time?
I love that we're all kind of saying the same thing here, because interestingly, I would agree with all of that. I am a huge proponent of paid family leave. I think it's abhorrent that we are the only major developed country in the world without a substantial paid family leave law on the books. And I do find it interesting, at the vice presidential debate a few weeks ago, both candidates very strongly advocated for paid family leave, which was very cool. Same with making childcare more affordable, allowing that village to participate, because motherhood is a beautiful journey. It's something that our society should be celebrating and uplifting and rewarding because of how uniquely special it is for society.
Amen to that. Yeah, I mean, it's husbands, we should all be incredibly valuing what our stay-at-home moms are doing with their kids, because it's so valuable and important. And if we're living our life with that attitude, that if your wife is staying home taking care of the kids, that she's doing the most important job in the family, which it probably is, more important than your job, or potentially. And because when you're working with kids, you're impacting their lives in profound ways. When you're raising your own kids, when you're giving them the education from your own self, from your own home, sharing that time with your own kids instead of outsourcing it, man, that's just like the best job. And so just to have that attitude that your wife is impacting your children and your family in huge ways, and you will value everything she does. And then when you come home from work and she said, man, I'm really tired, like these kids have just weren't on my last nerve, and you're like, okay, I understand. I'm tired too, but I haven't had 8 hours with those two boys, right? I had different customers to deal with, but I'm fresh as far as dealing with our two boys, so I'll spend some time with the two boys. I'll take over for a little bit, because I really value what you did today, and I want you to be happy. And you need a break, or you're at an 8-hour stopping point, I'll jump in right here and I'll help you out. I'll grab them, I'll take them out while you get dinner ready, and me and the boys will be out for a couple hours, and I'll get them all this, run them around, get them all the energy, get their energy out, get all their conflicts out, clean them up, get them changed, and we'll come back in for dinner or something, whatever you guys come up with. Or she'll go out and take them for a bike ride, and I'll cook the meal and get everything ready. And all you got to do is come back in at 6 o'clock and sit down at the table, and I'll have everything all ready for you. That's the beauty of marriage. It's such a joy. Like, I don't understand the conversation that talks about it as like drudgery and sadness, because It's a beautiful working relationship where two people are partnering together in the best vocation, which is raising your kids. There's nothing better than that. So you should be always happy in all situations because it's fantastic and you're all getting to be a part of it.
But interestingly, I never see the reverse celebration from the left. When you hear individuals and people who might not necessarily identify as postmodern feminists today celebrate motherhood, it's never mutually exclusive from also having a career and ambitions and starting your own business or hosting a podcast. Both are usually celebrated in tandem in most of the circles that I run in. But on the contrary, I often see motherhood demonized. I see pregnancy demonized. I see marriage demonized by individuals who are trying to get young women to believe that the only thing fulfilling to your life and to your identity is in fact your career. And we call that feminism today, and that's often echoed in the loudest voices in society. But I wish there were more conversations like this allowing for the nuance to exist because they're not mutually exclusive.
Yeah, and I think bringing back to this topic of speaking to the past generation that said, look, we've been there, done that. We stayed at home and like it was not that fulfilling. You know, it's the mindset of what you haven't experienced, the grass is always greener thing. And I think that's why society is always going to be doing that pendulum swing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it is, again, about appreciation and recognition, because I think for our mothers and grandmothers who were like, you know what, I did that and I didn't find it fulfilling. A lot of it wasn't the work that wasn't fulfilling. It was the fact that the people in their lives and society as a whole didn't value the work that they did. And that's why they were like, you know what, why did I dedicate my entire being to this when I didn't recognize, I didn't get that appreciation, I didn't feel valued for the work that I did. And I think overall, when you look back on your life, that's how you can sort of have that regret behind it.
Doing it a Christian way and you're celibate until marriage, and you get married young for that reason, you're finding the right spouse, you're mature, you got your principles, and you get married at 20, 21, and you start having kids at 22, 23, you might be done having kids by the time you're 30. And then at that point, you can start doing the things that you didn't get to do. Like a lot of people don't even start their careers and really start doing things until they're 40. So in your 30s, while you're raising your kids, you could be getting some education, you could be getting some experience a little bit here and there while you're raising your kids. And then when you're 40 and your kids are at a point where they're able to be left alone at the house by themselves and they're even helping you babysit the younger kids and whatnot, you can actually leave the house and go pursue these careers. And that's not too old, like 40 years old. A lot of people are really can get started at that age, and you can have like a really solid career or dreams from 40, 50 to 60. And, you know, I think we're just, we don't need to necessarily have that big career simultaneously when our kids are little. We can kind of piggyback. And then the other ironic thing is a lot of people aren't getting married and having kids until they're in their 30s. So it's like, okay, well then you had the 20s to actually do all those things in your career and get all that going and enjoy all that and satisfy all those urges. And then you can kind of taper that back, or maybe do it as a consultant or do it part-time while your kids are little, or maybe year on, year off, or however you work it out. And then as they get a little bit older, then you go back into it and hit it more heavy. There's a lot of creative ways you can do this, and combinations you can make things work. And it's so much more empowered if you have a spouse. If you're married and you have a working spouse that's working with you spouse, who's cooperating with you in any of these areas, the sky's the limit. And you can do so much together. You could work things out in so many ways to make things satisfying to you in your life.